Hello teacher. In this video I will be analyzing a short dialogue that I found on YouTube for the linguistics midterm test. I chose a conversation that lasts about 20 minutes, but for this analysis I chose a part of the video. I chose the first 4 minutes of it, and I will leave the link below in a Google document so you can watch it. So I'm going to focus on 3 components of linguistics, right? Linguistics has a lot of components, but for this analysis I chose 3 of them. And then I will explain how I would use this dialogue in a class. But before I explain the components, I'd like to begin with a little definition of linguistics. It says, linguistics is the scientific study of language and how it works. So linguistics deals with how people speak, how people understand the language, and how people use the language in different ways. And in order to better understand how language works, there are some components of it. There are some components that do this from different perspectives. So, as I already said before, I selected 3 of them that are phonology, syntax, and pragmatics. So let's begin with phonology. So what is it? To define phonology, I took as a reference an author that we have been working with for those 4 years in phonetics and phonology, that is Peter Roach. He says that phonology is the abstract side of the sounds of language. It studies how phonemes function in language and how they relate to each other. So phonology is about how we use sounds in a language in order to make words. Well, in phonology there are a lot of concepts that are very important to understand how the sounds function in the language, right? So let's take a look at some of them. First, we have the phonemes. The phonemes are basically the smallest unit of sound in a word, right? For example, we have the p sound and the b sound in the words pet and bat. Then there is also the concept of minimal pairs. Those are the pair of words that differ only by one sound but have different meanings. For example, in the words bat and cat, and in the words ship and sheep. So here, in the first example, the only sound that changes is the k sound. However, the meanings of the words are different. We also have the concepts of stress and intonation. Stress is when we say a part of a word or a sentence louder and clearer than others. And intonation refers to the rise or the falling of the voice, of the pitch when we speak. And this is usually to show some kind of emotion or some intention. So for example, if someone says something to surprise me, then I say, really? So here I am kind of showing some emotion to show that I am surprised. Then we also have the concept of allophones. These are different versions of the same phoneme. I mean, it's the same phoneme, but is pronounced differently depending on the context or the word. So here we have the word top and the word stop. So in phonology, we can say that a sound is aspirated or unspirated. So here, for example, if I pronounce the word top, top, when I pronounce this word, I can notice how there is a little air coming out of my mouth. So we can say it is aspirated. But then if I pronounce the word stop, 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 I can notice that it doesn't happen. I mean, there is no air coming out of my mouth when I pronounce this word. So we can say it is unaspirated. And last but not least, we have the concept of connected speech. This is a concept that we worked a lot last year in phonetics and phonology. So basically, when we speak in a natural conversation, we don't pronounce each word separately, right? What we do is we join sounds, we blend sounds together in order to sound more natural when we speak. There are several processes that explain this. I mean, different types of connected speech that explain what we do or what types of linking we do when we speak fast in a conversation. But I will talk a little bit more about this later when I explain some of the dialogues. Okay, let's move on to syntax. To define syntax, I took as a reference another author that is very important for us, that is David Crystal. It's a very short definition, but I think it's easy to understand. He says that the study of sentence structure is called syntax. So basically, syntax refers to how we string words together in order to create sentences. So syntax, as well as phonology, has concepts that are important to know in order to understand how syntax functions in a language, right? So the first concept we have is word order. This refers to the order of words in a sentence, right? So in English, the usual order is subject plus verb plus object. Then we also have the concept of grammatical patterns. This is the way words are arranged in a sentence, right? So there are different types of words that must go in a certain place, and all of them work all together in a specific order. So for example, in the sentence, the boy is eating an apple. Here, the boy is a noun phrase because it has a noun. Then is eating is a verb phrase because it has a verb. And in this case, we have another noun phrase because we have another noun. Then another concept within syntax is clauses, right? A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb together. A clause can be independent or dependent. The independent clause is when a phrase has or makes sense without giving any explanation, right? For example, if I say, I love pizza, this sentence doesn't need any explanation because it's very easy to understand, right? But then if I say, because she was tired, now this sentence does not make any sense, right? I mean, it does not have a clear meaning. So this is why it is a dependent clause, because by its own, it doesn't make any sense. Then another thing that I wrote over here, let's go back here. David Crystal says in his book that he says that English language has to rely a lot in syntax, and this made me think about Spanish language, right? So especially ending words in Spanish, they change a lot, right? So it's easier to convey the meaning in sentences. Now, in English, this does not happen as much as in Spanish. Um, of course, not only ending words, there are other type of words in Spanish that change more than in English. So this is why English, especially, depends more on word order to make the meaning clear. Now, for pragmatics, I also took a definition of another author that we have worked on, especially last year in linguistics, that is George Jewell, right? He says that pragmatics is concerned with the study of meaning as communicated by a speaker or writer and interpreted by a listener or reader. So, pragmatics is all about what speakers really mean when they speak, and not just the literal meaning of the words they speak, right? So here, just like in phonology and syntax, there are a lot of concepts that explain how pragmatic works in the language. One of them is speech acts. This is about what we are doing when we speak. So, for example, I could say, "Can you pass me the salt?" Now, because of the literal meaning of the words, it looks like a question. But actually, here, I am making a request, right? Can you pass me the salt? It's more a request than a question. Then another concept, is deixis. These are words that change meaning depending on who is talking and where. So, for example, if I say, "I am here," well, the meaning of the sentence will depend on who is telling the sentence and where I am, or where the person is, right? Another concept is politeness. Now, this is about how we show respect, how we show kindness, or how formal we are when we speak. So, for example, in this sentence, "Could you help me, please?" Now, this is clearly a very polite question, right? Then we have another concept that is implicature. Now, this is when someone says something but actually wants to say another thing. For example, in the sentence, "It's cold in here." Now, perhaps the person really means that he wants to close the window, right? So he's saying that in other words, okay? He's not directly saying, "Please close the window." No, he's saying, "It's cold in here." Now let's move on to the analysis of the dialogue. I selected some examples. I mean, some sentences from the dialogue where there are examples of all of those concepts that I talked about. So let's begin with phonology. Within phonology, we can find some connected speech examples in some of the sentences. As I mentioned before, connected speech is basically when words change or blend together when we speak in a normal conversation in order to sound more natural. So in this dialogue, we can find different types of connected speech. And in this sentence, we can find an example of assimilation and an example of elision. These are two types of connected speech. Assimilation is when one sound changes to sound more like the sound that is next to it. So, for example, in the part of the sentence, um, do you, when we speak quickly, the d and the e sounds are very close in the mouth. So instead of saying them separately like do you, we blend together into one sound. So it becomes do you, do you, do you. Now when we listen to the dialogue, we can notice this perfectly when the person speaks, right? Because the person blends both sounds. Then in the same sentence we can find an example of elision. That is basically when a sound is dropped. So in the word often, especially in American accent, that is the one present in the video, we can notice how the person drops the t sound in the word often. So instead of saying often, the person says often, often, like this, often. Then we can also find another type of connected speech, that is linking. Linking is when the last sound of one word connects to the first sound of the next word. So in this example, I selected the sentence, I started last year. So in the sentence last year, the t sound at the end of the word last links with the first sound of the word ear, that is the e sound. So in natural conversation, and when we listen to the dialogue in the video, we will notice how the person do not say last year. The person will say last year, because there is a linking between those sounds, right? Like this, last year. Then another type of connected speech we can find in the dialogue are contractions. Now, this type of connected speech is very common in English, right? So basically it is when an expression or any other word is contracted, right? And here we have some examples that appear in the dialogue. For example, I'm, it's, I'd. So those are contractions. For example, the first one is a contraction of I am. The second one, it is a contraction of it is. And I'd is a contraction of I would. Now, continuing with syntax, in the three different dialogues, all the people use grammatically correct sentences. For example, I am a student at Boston University studying psychology. I try to hit the courts at least a couple of times a week. I've started a little garden. It's a nice hobby. So we can see that all of the sentences has a subject, a verb, and some of them even have a little more information, like the place or the times, and all the words are put together in a certain order that makes sense. And the last one is pragmatics, which we can also find some examples in the dialogues. For example, in the first dialogue, there is a sentence that says, maybe we could explore together sometime. Now, here the person is not directly saying, do you want to go out with me? Instead, he says, maybe we could explore together sometimes, which is implying an interest in spending more time together with the person without saying it directly. So this is an example of implicature. Then in the first dialogue, there is another example that says, one person says, "Where are you from originally?" Then the other one answers, "I'm from New York City, but I moved here for work." So in the word here, its meaning depends on where the speaker is. Uh, so if the person was somewhere else, here, the meaning of here would change, right? Now, to integrate these concepts in a class, I would implement a listening activity for a 7th grade group, and I would focus on the third dialogue from the video. So to begin, I would guide students through a short warming up. First, I would show students two pictures, one of a house and another from an apartment. And I would ask questions like, what do you see? What are the differences between these two homes? Then some personal questions like, where do you live? Do you like it? I believe this kind of warming up would be nice to activate their prior knowledge, for them to express ideas that they may already know. And then for the listening activity, I would play only once at first, so that they can get a general idea of what is going on. And then I would ask some questions like, for example, what is the topic? Do the people live in the same kind of places? What kind of places are mentioned in the conversation? This reminds me of Krashen's input hypothesis that says that we learn a language best when we understand messages that are just a little harder than what we already know. And I think this dialogue is excellent for a 7th grade group, at least for mine. I think it would be perfect for them. Then for the post reading and listening, here I would try to focus a bit more on the components of linguistics. So regarding phonology, I would focus on word stress, right? I would briefly explain that in English, most of the words have one part that is stronger when we pronounce, so we have to say it a bit louder. For example, in the word apartment, we do not say apartment, we say apartment, right? Then I would write down some words on the whiteboard for them to practice, and after, of course, words that appear in the video, right? And after that, I would continue with sentence stress. I would tell the students that in English we often stress the most important words in a sentence, or the ones that carry the meaning. For example, in the sentence, do you live in a house or an apartment? So students would then have to listen again to the audio and repeat the sentences and practice with all the sentences from the audio. Now, continuing with syntax, in order to practice this, I would break down some sentences from the video, and I would take students a building sentence activity. So students would have some separate words, like, for example, location, perfect, is, me, for, the, plus. So here they would have to read the words and order them in order for the sentence to make sense. And then for pragmatics concept, first I would work with students on how to ask politely, and sound naturally in a conversation, right? Um I would discuss how tone and how facial expressions affect how the message is received by the listener, and how the message can change depending on how the people express themselves, even if the sentences are grammatically correct. So for the post listening activity, I I would ask students to take into account what we talked about earlier, and I would ask them to create sentences similar to the ones in the video, like a conversation. And then they would have to identify the stress in the words and the sentences. They have to practice how to say them, how to pronounce the words. And finally, in order to make the activity a little bit more communicative, students would have to role play the conversation, taking into account what we talked about, pragmatics. This activity is based on the communicative learning teaching approach that we have been working with in didactics. I really like this type of activities when students have to role play a conversation, because I think it helps students use the language in real life situations, not just for learning rules, but I think it gives them the chance to talk, to interact, to express their ideas, to express meaning. And I think this helps them learn better and makes them feel more confident when speaking. So this is it, teacher. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.